"Open the door, Mr. Walker. Your spouse is under apprehension." The forceful rapping against our entry resonated with such intensity that I feared the glass panes might fracture. It was the kind of violent impact one hears in police dramas just before the door is unhinged. Except this was not a television production. This was unfolding on my very own front porch. It was shortly after dawn, the morning light still gentle, the air crisp. Sarah and I had been awake for approximately 20 minutes. I was midway through my inaugural mug of coffee, standing in the kitchen, still clad in my well-worn flannel robe and socks. I became immobile, the mug clutched in my hand, my gaze fixed on the source of the commotion. The pounding resumed, more forceful, more insistent. "Daniel Walker," a voice boomed, sharp, authoritative, far too loud for this tranquil thoroughfare. "Emerge, immediately." I cast a glance towards Sarah, who had just entered the hallway, securing her dark hair. Her eyebrows arched subtly, as if inquiring, "Now what?" I placed my coffee down on the counter and advanced towards the front entrance. Through the adjacent window, I glimpsed a flash of dark blue uniforms of a certain type and saw movement. 4 individuals were positioned on my porch, broad-shouldered, attired in tactical trousers, black footwear, and dark navy shirts emblazoned with large white block letters stenciled across the back. "Ha, Inspector. HOA Inspector." I narrowed my eyes. The shirts appeared as though they had been procured from one of those novelty uniform retailers, cheap polyester gleaming under the early morning sun. Nevertheless, the presentation could have deceived someone half asleep or someone lacking discernment. They stood in a deliberate formation, 2 in the foreground, 2 behind, conveying an impression of being trained for an incursion. Sunglasses obscured their eyes. One of them, the tallest, rested a hand on his hip, where a sidearm was holstered. I opened the door just enough to keep the security chain engaged. "What is the purpose of this?" The tall individual at the front stepped forward, and my stomach tightened as I recognized his features. Greg Morrison, my neighbor residing across the street. Greg and I had exchanged numerous words over the preceding year, some amiable, most not. Yet, observing him here, dressed in the guise of a tactical operative, was an entirely novel experience. He wore wraparound sunglasses, despite the sun barely being visible, a dark baseball cap pulled low, and that characteristic smug half-smile that evoked a desire to slam the door in his face. "Step aside, sir," Greg stated, his voice low and imbued with that pretense of authority he so enjoyed projecting. "We possess official reports detailing a code infraction and a potential security lapse. Your spouse requires escort for interrogation." I stared at him. Interrogation by the HOA? Greg's smirk widened, and he inclined his head slightly towards the men accompanying him. "Neighborhood security is not a trivial matter, Mr. Walker. Now bring her out here. We can resolve this amicably or through less agreeable means." Behind him, one of the self-proclaimed inspectors shifted his weight uncomfortably. Another glanced toward the street, perhaps to ascertain if any of the local residents were observing. The sun was now ascending higher, and I could discern Mrs. Jenkins down the block, peeking through her window coverings. Footsteps sounded from behind me. Sarah emerged, composed as always. She was wearing her dark gray athletic jacket, the one with the silver piping along the shoulders, and fitted black trousers. She walked to my side, her gaze fixed on Greg and his contingent. Greg straightened slightly. "Madam, you are accompanying us now." Sarah's voice was steady. "Do you possess a warrant?" That single word seemed to destabilize him for a fleeting moment. What? A search warrant? An arrest warrant? Any legal documentation whatsoever?" She tilted her head slightly, her tone courteous but underscored with steel. "Are you merely playing dress-up this morning?" One of the inspectors coughed into his hand, evidently striving to suppress amusement. Another averted his gaze as if embarrassed to be present. Greg's jaw clenched. "I require no document to safeguard this community," he declared, his fingers brushing against the grip of the firearm secured to his belt. The holster appeared professional, but the weapon, having seen sufficient genuine sidearms, I knew this one was not standard issue. Sarah remained motionless. Her eyes were locked on his, and in that instant I perceived the transformation. Her posture subtly straightened, her shoulders squared, and that serene expression, the one I had witnessed her adopt during prior tense encounters, settled upon her features. Greg had no inkling that he had just initiated a confrontation he was destined to lose. "Daniel," Sarah stated without turning to me, "kindly contact the sheriff's department and request the on-duty sergeant. Inform them that we have 4 individuals impersonating law enforcement officers on our front porch." Greg's lips contorted into a grimace that was midway between a sneer and a snarl. "You are making a grave error." Sarah's voice was cool. "No, Greg, the error is yours." For a beat, the only sound was the low hum of a neighbor's air conditioning unit. Then, from somewhere further down the street, came the faint click of a camera shutter. Someone was documenting the event. I had no premonition then that this would be the initial domino in a sequence of occurrences that would dismantle the tranquil existence we had cultivated and propel us both into a realm far grander and considerably more ominous than a petty neighborhood disagreement. 2 years prior, the notion of a morning such as this, with men in fabricated uniforms battering down our door, would have seemed preposterous. Back then, Sarah and I were pursuing something straightforward: tranquility and repose. We had resided in San Diego proper for over a decade. I was a civil engineer, dedicating long hours to substantial construction projects. Sarah, well, as far as anyone was aware, she was a private security consultant. It was the sort of professional description that appeased curiosity without truly illuminating anything. Our acquaintances accepted it, our neighbors accepted it, and I never voiced my doubts. At least not outwardly. By our mid-40s, we were both weary of the urban environment, the incessant noise, the traffic congestion, the pervasive sense of perpetually racing from one obligation to the next. Oakwood Heights presented itself as a fragment of what we felt we were missing. It was a master-planned community, situated just far enough from the city to evoke a sense of separation, yet close enough for my daily commute to remain bearable. Tree-lined avenues, meticulously maintained lawns, neighbors who offered greetings from their porches, the kind of locale where children cycled until twilight and residents left their front doors unlocked. We acquired a 2-story, craftsman-style residence at the terminus of a secluded cul-de-sac. The backyard offered ample space for Sarah to establish her fitness regimen, and the garage was sufficiently spacious to accommodate my tools and workbench. The initial weeks felt akin to a second honeymoon. We hosted a modest barbecue, met the individuals residing next door, and initiated our nightly ritual of traversing the neighborhood loop just before dusk. It was during this period that we encountered Greg Morrison. At that juncture, Greg embodied the quintessential friendly neighbor. Tall, athletic, in his mid to late 30s, with a neat appearance and an ever-present smile. He informed us that he was concurrently a local police officer and the neighborhood safety liaison for the HOA. I was uncertain if this constituted an official title, but he carried it with an air of significant importance. In those nascent days, he proved remarkably helpful. He visited during our second week to assist me with a leaky water pipe in the garage. He commended Sarah's landscaping efforts in the backyard, noting her keen eye for detail. He even extended an invitation to a weekend barbecue where he introduced us to the other residents of the block as the exemplary couple. When Greg was in uniform, he would offer a salute from his driveway as we passed on our walks. His presence, along with the black and white police cruiser frequently parked in front, seemed to lend the street an additional stratum of security. Neighbors frequently remarked upon our good fortune in having an actual law enforcement officer residing among us. For a time, it represented precisely what we desired: tranquility, security, and predictability. The first inkling of discord emerged approximately 1 year into our residency when we resolved to replace our aging wooden fence. The boards were warped and splintering, and frankly, it detracted from the visual appeal of the property. We desired something more robust, something that would afford Sarah greater privacy for her professional activities, which, in my understanding, remained within the realm of security consulting. After reviewing the municipal ordinances, obtaining a survey of the property line, and securing all requisite permits, we engaged a contractor to erect a 6-foot-tall wrought iron fence. We were well within our legal entitlements. City regulations permitted fences up to 8 feet in height. However, on the day construction commenced, Greg's demeanor underwent a noticeable alteration. The salutes ceased. The convivial exchanges evaporated. He began to frequent his front yard, arms crossed, observing the crew at work. His wife, Linda, started to hurry past us during her dog walks, avoiding any eye contact. One evening, Greg approached our residence. He was wearing a dark polo shirt adorned with a small, shield-shaped emblem on the chest. Not precisely a police uniform, but sufficiently similar to suggest an official capacity. "Mike," he said. For some inexplicable reason, he always addressed me as Mike. "Would you consider reducing the height of that fence to 4 feet? It obstructs my view of the street from my kitchen window." I politely informed him that we valued our privacy, particularly given Sarah's frequent work-from-home arrangements and her handling of sensitive communications. "I understand," he replied, his smile tightening perceptibly. "However, as a representative of the HOA, I believe we should prioritize communal harmony above individual preferences." This was the first instance in which he invoked his HOA affiliation as if it conferred substantial authority. Up to that point, I had presumed that the role of neighborhood safety chairman entailed organizing neighborhood gatherings and perhaps coordinating holiday decorations. I recall closing the door after his departure and experiencing a subtle disquieting sensation in my stomach. At the time, I rationalized it as inconsequential, merely a neighbor with a pronounced opinion. However, in retrospect, that was the precise moment when the foundation of our serenity began to erode. It was the initial indication that beneath Greg's polished and obliging exterior lay something more austere, more frigid, and considerably more perilous. It did not take long for that unsettling knot in my stomach to be vindicated. Less than a week after Greg's visit, I discovered an envelope in our mailbox that caused my heart to plummet. Heavy paper stock, bearing the embossed letterhead of a law firm, the kind of correspondence one cannot afford to disregard. Inside was a formal notification: prepare the bylaws of the Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association. The fence currently under construction at your property is in direct contravention of community aesthetic standards. Failure to comply with HOA mandates will result in daily fines of $500, effective 30 days from the date of this notice. I read it twice. The legalistic phrasing seemed to crawl like ants across my vision. Sarah was in the backyard when I showed it to her midway through her workout. She was dressed in her typical dark athletic attire, her hair pulled back, and was not even breathing heavily after what appeared to be an arduous set of burpees. Her eyes scanned the page once, and she shook her head. "They cannot do this," she stated flatly. "We possess the necessary permits. We are in full compliance with municipal regulations." Her tone was not defensive. Rather, it was assured, as if she were already privy to every regulation and every loophole. Nevertheless, I was disinclined to initiate a dispute with a law firm without verifying the facts. I contacted the telephone number printed at the bottom of the letter. The receptionist on the other end sounded perplexed. "I apologize, sir, but we have no record of your address, and we most certainly did not issue any notice concerning offense." "So, this is a forgery?" I inquired. There was a pause. "If someone has utilized our firm's name without authorization, that constitutes a federal offense. Could you perhaps email me a copy of the letter?" By the time I concluded the call, my hands were trembling, partly from anger and partly from the chilling realization that this was not merely Greg exhibiting pettiness. This was a calculated maneuver. That evening at dinner, Sarah was uncharacteristically quiet. She would periodically step outside between bites to engage in telephone conversations, speaking in a subdued tone that I found difficult to decipher. I inquired if it was work-related. She offered a strained smile. "Merely complicated," she replied. "Nothing I can elaborate on at present." Over the ensuing week, the attitude of the neighborhood towards us began to shift palpably. Individuals who previously offered greetings now altered their course to avoid us. Mrs. Patterson from 2 doors down, who had once presented us with homemade cookies, now avoided my gaze entirely. Then the notes began to appear, slipped beneath our windshield wipers, affixed to the mailbox, tucked into the frame of our front door. They maintained a courteous, almost saccharine tone. We would appreciate it if you would cooperate with the community for the benefit of all. One was less polite. Outsiders do not comprehend the operational dynamics of well-functioning neighborhoods. The handwriting varied on each occasion, as did the paper stock, but the underlying message remained consistent. Sarah observed these developments, of course. She perceived everything. She began dedicating more time to her backyard phone calls, employing what I can only characterize as tactical discourse. Not precisely military jargon, but rather deliberate terminology that I had never heard her employ previously. I began to perceive her in a different light. Subtle nuances that had always been present, yet I had never connected them. Her automatic selection of a restaurant table offering a clear vantage point of all exits, the economy and efficiency of her movements, her capacity to assess a stranger in under 2 seconds. Greg, meanwhile, was not content to merely disseminate rumors. He escalated his actions. One Saturday afternoon, he organized what he termed an emergency HOA meeting, convening directly on the sidewalk in front of our residence. Nearly 20 neighbors were in attendance. Greg had a freshly printed sign propped against his folding chair, proclaiming him the neighborhood security chairman. He rose to speak, gesturing towards our partially constructed fence as if it were a crime scene. "As you can observe," he stated loudly, "the Walker family has steadfastly refused to adhere to community standards. This is not solely a matter of aesthetics. A fence of this height could potentially conceal illicit activities from street observation." A few individuals offered nods of agreement. Others exchanged uncertain glances. Then he delivered the bombshell. "I have conducted a background investigation on our new neighbors," he announced, directing his gaze squarely at Sarah through the window. "Sarah Walker is employed at a classified facility, and the precise nature of her job responsibilities is designated as confidential. For all we know, we could be residing next to individuals who pose a threat to national security." A murmur spread through the assembled crowd. Several individuals subtly retreated. I stood at the window beside Sarah, my fists clenched. "He cannot do that. He cannot simply—" "Oh, he can," she replied quietly. "But he has just made the most significant miscalculation of his life." Her voice was calm, but I detected a discernible shift in her eyes. The same shift I would witness again later, on the morning Greg appeared with his so-called HOA inspectors. At that juncture, however, I still lacked a complete understanding of whom I had married or the extent of her preparedness for the impending challenges. Following that so-called emergency assembly, the prevailing atmosphere in Oakwood Heights underwent a rapid transformation. Not the meteorological conditions, but the general ambience. When we initially moved in, we could not traverse the neighborhood loop without encountering half a dozen individuals offering waves or pausing for conversation. Now discussions would cease mid-sentence as we approached, gazes would divert, smiles would diminish or vanish entirely. I had grown up in a quintessential small American town. I recognized the characteristic signs when gossip began to take root. And Greg was not planting seeds, he was broadcasting them with the amplification of a megaphone. One afternoon, I observed him in his driveway conversing with Mr. Callahan, who resided 3 houses away. Their discussion immediately ceased the moment I stepped outside to retrieve the mail. Greg clapped Callahan on the shoulder and imparted something in a low tone. Callahan offered me a curt nod, then departed without uttering another word. By the following week, the friendly notes reappeared, tucked beneath our windshield wipers, taped to the front door. "We would appreciate it if you would cooperate with the community for the benefit of all. Perhaps lowering the fence would facilitate mutual accord." They were still penned in varied handwriting, which indicated to me that Greg was enlisting others to execute his clandestine tasks. Sarah meticulously collected each note, placing them in individual Ziploc bags and storing them in her office. She commented minimally on them, simply placing them inside, labeling the bag, and adding it to a container that was already half full. If the cold shoulders and anonymous missives represented the preliminary tactics, the subsequent phase was the assertive push. On a Wednesday evening, around 9 o'clock, I heard voices outside. Not the casual chatter of neighbors, but the purposeful tone of individuals engaged in a mission. Upon peering through the blinds, I observed Greg conversing with two men whom I did not recognize. They were pointing towards our house, gesturing towards the side yard, and then nodding as if a consensus had been reached. The following evening, as Sarah and I were tidying up after dinner, there was a sharp knock at the door. It was not the percussive assault of earlier, not yet, but firm enough to set my teeth on edge. Upon opening it, I found Greg standing there, clad in that same dark polo shirt with the fabricated badge insignia. His arms were crossed, his smile was polite but brittle. "Evening, Dan. Merely wished to remind you about Saturday morning's neighborhood safety inspection as per HOA protocol. We will be conducting inspections to ensure everyone is in compliance." I kept my hand on the door. "Is that an actual HOA policy or something you have recently devised?" Greg tilted his head. "I believe you will discover that it is in everyone's best interest to cooperate. Refusal of inspection conveys an unfavorable impression." That night, Sarah and I sat in the living room, the television muted. She was perusing something on her phone. Her brow was furrowed in that distinctive manner that I had come to recognize as indicative of intense concentration. "He is escalating," she stated. Finally. I noticed. "Saturday is not a safety inspection. It is a calculated attempt at intimidation. He intends to arrive with his entourage and attempt to fabricate some infraction." I leaned forward. "So, what is our course of action?" She looked up from her phone, her gaze steady. We shall permit him to proceed, but I will be prepared." 2 days later, the inspection commenced earlier than anticipated. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. The power grid failed first. Every illumination in the neighborhood extinguished, plunging the street into a profound, unnatural silence. Then came the crunch of footwear on gravel, the low murmur of voices, and the sharp metallic click of a gate latch. Upon peering through the curtains, my initial thought was of a SWAT team. 4 figures in tactical trousers, boots, and navy blue shirts. However, the words emblazoned in large white letters across their backs caused me to blink twice. HOA Inspector. They were even sporting black ball caps, earpieces, and clipboards, as if the clipboards lent them official status. The spectacle might have been amusing had it not been for the handguns holstered on 2 of their hips, and the fact that they were on my property at 2 in the morning. Greg led the group, a flashlight in one hand, sweeping its beam across our windows. He halted at the front porch and knocked with considerable force. Sarah was already positioned at the top of the stairs, fully attired, her posture erect and alert. She did not appear startled. "Stay here," she instructed me quietly. "I will manage this." And the manner in which she spoke it was not a request, it was an unequivocal directive. Greg's knocking was not of the courteous variety. It was the kind designed to rouse the deceased. 3 sharp, resounding blows that echoed through the darkened dwelling. HOA inspection. He barked loudly enough for half the block to hear. "Open up." Sarah did not hasten. She approached the front door with the deliberate pace of someone entering a meeting for which they had thoroughly prepared. Calm, measured steps. I followed a few paces behind, my pulse thrumming in my ears. She activated the porch light. The sudden inundation of illumination illuminated 4 men in those dark navy shirts bearing the inscription HOA Inspector across their backs. 2 held clipboards tucked beneath their arms. 1 brandished a maglite as if it were a club. And Greg, standing prominently at the forefront, had his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. Sarah unlocked the deadbolt but did not open the door completely. "May I be of assistance, gentlemen?" Greg's mouth curled into that practiced smirk. "We have received reports of unusual activity on your property. HOA protocol mandates immediate inspection in the event of a potential security concern." Sarah's gaze flickered to the lettering on the men's shirts, then back to Greg. "At 2 o'clock in the morning, some matters cannot be deferred," he stated. "Now we can proceed efficiently and without complication," or she interrupted him. "Present the documentation." Greg blinked. "Documentation?" "Yes." "Whatever grants you the authority to be on my property in the dead of night." "A search warrant. An HOA inspection order. Anything bearing an actual signature." One of the men behind Greg shifted his weight uneasily. Greg, keep it down. Greg snapped a response over his shoulder. He then turned his attention back to Sarah. I am under no obligation to display anything to you. I am part of law enforcement. This is my designated area of responsibility. Sarah tilted her head, a gesture of mild curiosity. Your jurisdiction? She inquired. That's correct, he affirmed, squaring his shoulders and puffing himself up slightly. I've been ensuring the safety of this community long before you arrived, and I don't require assistance from someone like you. She widened the doorway just enough to stand at the threshold. The glow from the porch light illuminated a small, silver badge-shaped emblem affixed to her jacket collar. You're on my property at 2 a.m. without a warrant, impersonating an officer, and you're armed. That's a substantial list of violations for you, Greg. His gaze shifted to the pin, then back to her face. Don't attempt to intimidate me. I'm not trying, she replied calmly. This is me extending politeness. For several moments neither moved. The men accompanying Greg no longer stood as tall as before. One of them focused intently on his footwear. Another subtly glanced towards the street, as if contemplating the quickest route for an exit. Greg attempted to push past. Step aside, Sarah. I need to ascertain if there's any immediate danger here. Sarah's voice lowered to a tone I'd only encountered once or twice, previously subdued, serene, and undeniably authoritative. Greg, if you step across this boundary, you will be considered a trespasser, and you will be departing from here in the custody of a genuine police cruiser. His jaw tightened, and I could perceive the internal debate behind his eyes, whether to challenge her assertion or to make a decisive move. The silence stretched, taut as a high-tension wire. Then Sarah spoke again, her voice still measured. Daniel, would you be so kind as to contact the sheriff's department and inform them that we have individuals bearing arms who are pretending to be inspectors at our front door? Please, request the duty sergeant. Greg's face flushed crimson beneath the porch light. You're making a grave error, Sarah. No, she stated, her eyes fixed intently on his. The error is yours, and your window for disengagement is rapidly closing. For a fleeting instant, I apprehended the possibility that he might act impulsively. His hand twitched near his sidearm, but the individual holding the flashlight stepped forward, murmured something to Greg, and he finally, unequivocally, stepped back. This is far from over, he declared, pointing a finger at her in a gesture of menace. Not by a considerable margin. She remained unmoved. You're correct. It is not over. However, the next time you approach my property, I strongly advise you to have legitimate legal authority accompanying you. They departed without another word, the four of them receding into the shadows at the far end of the street. The power returned approximately 5 minutes later. I closed the door, secured it, and turned to face Sarah. She was still standing there, her gaze fixed on the window until their figures had vanished. Who exactly are you? I inquired. She offered no immediate response. Not yet, she stated. Yet I knew the answer was forthcoming, and when it arrived, the tranquil suburban existence we had known would be irrevocably altered. The house fell silent once more, but not with the comforting quietude of before. The present silence was heavy, as if the very walls were eavesdropping. Sarah lingered at the front window a moment longer, her eyes still scanning the street. I could discern the faint luminescence of a distant flashlight as Greg and his companions disappeared between the houses. Finally, she turned and walked toward the kitchen. We need to talk. I followed her, my mind replaying every detail of the preceding 10 minutes, the ersatz uniforms, the firearms, Greg's smug, self-satisfied expression. Sarah, what on earth was that? I asked, perhaps with more volume than intended. She didn't retort. Instead, she placed a kettle on the stove, filled it with water, and ignited the burner. It hissed to life. Only then did she speak. You've been harboring questions about me for some time now, haven't you? Her observation caught me off guard. What does that have to do with Greg showing up here in the dead of night? Everything, she stated simply. The kettle began to emit a low rumble, steam curling upwards. She stood opposite me, her hands resting flat on the counter, and met my gaze directly. "My name is Sarah Walker. I am the elected sheriff of this county." I stared at her, unsure of what I had anticipated, but it certainly wasn't that. "Sheriff?" I repeated, as if I might have misheard. "Yes," she confirmed. 15 years in law enforcement, 10 of those within the sheriff's department, and elected last year." She paused, allowing the information to settle. "I chose not to inform you because I desired for us to have a semblance of a normal life here. But after tonight, normal is no longer an option." The kettle began to whistle softly, a sound I barely registered. "I believed you were in private security," I stated, still attempting to process the revelation. "That's what I allowed people to believe," she explained. "When you hold this position, you inevitably make adversaries, not merely those you can readily identify, but individuals possessing considerable resources and deep-seated resentments. At times, it is more prudent for your safety, and mine, if they are unaware of my residence." I leaned back against the wall, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "So, Greg is a dangerous man," she interjected. "He's not simply a meddlesome neighbor with a counterfeit badge. He's impersonating law enforcement, which is a felony. The charade tonight, armed trespass. Had I wished, I could have had all 4 of them face down on the lawn and secured in zip ties before the power was even restored." She delivered this statement with a remarkable matter-of-factness, devoid of any boastful undertone. "Why didn't you?" I inquired. "Because I wanted to observe his next move. Now I know he's prepared to escalate, and that means he will inevitably make a misstep. One I can exploit." She poured hot water into 2 mugs, slid one towards me, and then reached into her jacket pocket. From it she produced a small digital recorder. "I had this recording the entire time," she stated. "Every word he uttered tonight is documented on here." It dawned on me then. She had been anticipating this, or at least preparing for it, long before Greg's arrival. "What's his objective, Sarah? What is he truly after?" She leaned back, her mug in hand. "I'm not entirely certain yet, but individuals like him don't orchestrate such elaborate displays simply out of spite. There's a larger scheme at play." She then offered a small, dangerous smile. "Now, he's my case." For the first time that evening, a sensation other than fear flickered within me. It was the dawning realization that the man who had sought to intimidate us had absolutely no conception of whom he had chosen to provoke. Sarah took a sip of her tea and then set the mug down. "Tomorrow I begin my investigation. Greg Morrison is about to regret ever hearing my name." Sarah wasted no time the following morning. By the time I descended the stairs, she was already seated at the dining room table, her laptop open, a notepad beside it, and that familiar intensity in her gaze, the same look she adopted when strategizing a significant operation. Her coffee remained untouched. She was too absorbed to drink it. "Good morning," I said, still feeling groggy. "You start early." She glanced up. "Greg Morrison doesn't exist. Not within this county's records, nor within the state's. He's not a registered officer anywhere in California. He's not even a registered security guard here." She tapped the laptop screen, which displayed a blank search result from a state licensing database. I moved closer. "So, who is he?" "That's precisely what I'm in the process of discovering." Sarah navigated to another window, accessing a law enforcement-only database available to her as sheriff. "We conduct background checks on all new personnel. I'm performing one on him now. The challenge lies in identifying his true name." It didn't take her long. A cursory review of property records revealed that the deed to Greg's residence was registered under the name Gregory Mitchell, not Morrison. Upon entering that information into her system, the results appeared rapidly. 3 prior arrests, she read aloud. 2 in Arizona for impersonating a police officer. 1 in Nevada for harassment. Terminated from at least 3 private security firms due to abuse of authority. Civil litigation in both states involving allegations of intimidation, false incident reports, and stalking. I stared at the screen. "And now he's here, in our neighborhood." She nodded slowly. "He's been relocating from state to state for years. Initially, he presents as friendly, cultivates trust, and then exploits that trust to exert influence. In certain instances, he has effectively seized control of the homeowners association entirely. My stomach sank. This isn't about the fence. No, she stated, her voice hardening. This is about control. And my estimation is it's about money. She switched to another tab, accessing a database of corporate filings. He's linked to at least 2 shell corporations registered in Nevada. Both list the same mailing address associated with an individual named Victor Hale. Who is that? I asked. Sarah's eyes narrowed. A real estate investor previously under investigation for property fraud schemes targeting military families. He would identify homeowners experiencing financial difficulties, pressure them into selling below market value, and then quickly resell the properties for a substantial profit. And you suspect Greg is working for him? I believe Greg is performing the more unsavory tasks. The intimidation, the fabrication of violations, the sowing of discord among neighbors to facilitate Hale's intervention and subsequent rescue of individuals from their perceived problematic homes. She leaned back in her chair. This means we are not merely confronting a fraudulent officer, we are dealing with an organized criminal enterprise. I rubbed my temples. So, what's the next step? Now, she stated, we meticulously gather evidence. Every action Greg takes from this point forward will be documented. She presented me with a small black device, a professional-grade surveillance camera no larger than a deck of cards. I'm installing 3 of these today, 2 externally and 1 internally near the front entrance. They are motion-activated, equipped with night vision, and capable of audio recording. You just happen to have these on hand? I inquired. She gave me a look that clearly indicated I already knew the answer. By mid-afternoon, the cameras were in place. One was artfully concealed within the branches of the maple tree in our front yard, its lens directed toward the street. Another was discreetly positioned beneath the eaves above the garage. The third was situated inside, angled to capture anyone standing at the door. That evening, Sarah sat me down. Here's the strategy. We allow Greg to believe he's gaining the upper hand. We disregard his minor provocations. However, when he oversteps his bounds, which he inevitably will, we will have irrefutable video evidence. Her voice was calm, yet an undercurrent of resolve, perhaps even anticipation, was palpable. I understood then that Greg Mitchell, or Morrison, or whatever alias he employed, had made a critical error in choosing our residence to disrupt. And I had a distinct premonition that he would soon discover this to his detriment. Sarah consistently maintained that individuals like Greg were susceptible to 2 primary motivators: attention and opportunity. All that was required was to provide them with just enough of both, and they would invariably reveal their true nature. The morning after she uncovered his actual identity, she was at the dining room table, her laptop and phone spread before her, diligently constructing what she termed the web. She commenced with the HOA's private group forum, a platform Greg had actively promoted to all residents under the guise of security updates. Sarah had rarely engaged with it previously, but now she posted a carefully worded message. Heads up, everyone. We've been requested to temporarily store some equipment for a county training exercise. Nothing to be concerned about, but the delivery truck might arrive late at night. Please do not be alarmed if you observe activity in our driveway. No specific details were divulged, merely enough to convey an official tone. Then she waited. By the afternoon, the bait had been taken. Someone, almost certainly Greg, had screenshotted her message and disseminated it to at least 3 other neighbors. Within hours, Sarah's phone chimed with an alert from the concealed camera positioned above our garage. It depicted Greg pacing on the sidewalk across the street, phone pressed to his ear, his gaze fixed intently on our residence. That evening, Sarah escalated the maneuver. Utilizing her sheriff's department credentials, she fabricated a mock training inventory list. Nothing sensitive was included, but it contained sufficient official-sounding jargon to appear legitimate. She then deliberately left it open on her laptop, positioned in clear view of the front window. "Isn't this a bit overly theatrical?" I inquired, as she adjusted the blinds to ensure the screen was visible from the street. "Precisely," she responded with a slight smile. Theatrical tactics are effective on individuals who require a narrative to rationalize their actions. It wasn't long before the anticipated response. The following morning, the camera concealed within the maple tree captured Greg standing on our lawn before sunrise, angling his phone through the window, meticulously photographing the contents of her laptop screen. Sarah downloaded the footage, meticulously labeled it, and filed it away. "Step 1 is complete," she declared. "Step 2 commences this evening." Sarah logged into a secure communication channel and initiated a call to an individual she introduced only as Rodriguez. I later learned he was a retired FBI agent with whom she had collaborated on joint investigations. "Your man is definitely still active," Rodriguez stated via the speakerphone. "His name is Victor Hale. He's been moving property through straw buyers for years. Mitchell, your neighbor, is one of his enforcers." Sarah's pen scratched rhythmically across her notepad. "Do you have sufficient evidence for an indictment?" "Not yet. But if we can prove he's operating under false pretenses of authority and employing intimidation tactics to compel property sales, we can pursue federal charges. Provide me with the link connecting his fabricated police persona to Hale's shell corporations and we'll be in business." Once the call concluded, Sarah leaned back, tapping her pen thoughtfully. "We're going to present him with something he believes he can exploit and observe where it leads." Over the subsequent 2 days, she meticulously constructed the remainder of the trap. She drafted a fraudulent memorandum addressed to Sheriff Sarah Walker from a fictitious county tactical training division pertaining to the relocation of high-value assets. The language was deliberately ambiguous, but alluded to sensitive law enforcement equipment being transferred for safekeeping. Subsequently, she placed a printed copy in our unsecured mailbox. By dusk, it had vanished. The following morning, the camera positioned by the garage recorded Greg meeting with an unidentified man beside a silver SUV. They stood near the driver's door, exchanging the document and gesturing towards our house. Sarah reviewed the footage twice, then magnified the SUV's license plate. "That's Hale's vehicle," she observed. "He's here." That evening, Sarah intensified the pressure. She posted a brief update to the HOA chat. "Reminder: due to the upcoming delivery of training equipment, please ensure driveways remain clear. Arrival time is classified, but expected within the next 72 hours. Within 20 minutes, one of the other cameras captured Greg engaged in a phone conversation, pacing his driveway. "Are you certain it's worth something?" he inquired into the receiver. A brief pause ensued. "Very well, I'll handle it. We'll ensure they are removed before the scheduled delivery." Sarah muted the audio clip and met my gaze with an expression that conveyed she had just obtained precisely what she had intended. That night over dinner, I voiced the question that had been consuming me. "What happens if this strategy backfires on us? What if they realize you're actively provoking them?" She set down her fork, met my eyes, and stated, "Then we advance to step 3. "And what is step 3? Her lips curved into a small, chilling smile. "Public exposure, the kind from which there is no recovery." I refrained from asking for further details. A part of me preferred not to know until it transpired, but I could sense it. The tide was irrevocably turning. Greg believed he was meticulously assembling a case against us. He remained utterly oblivious to the fact that every single action he took was providing Sarah with the very rope he would ultimately use for his own undoing. Greg had been ostentatiously parading through the neighborhood for days, projecting an air of triumphant victory. The staged inspection, the clandestine whispers, the discreet meetings in driveways, all of it was a deliberate build-up to a specific event. Sarah perceived it as well. "He's going to call a public meeting," she informed me on Friday morning, taking a sip of her coffee at the dining table. "It's how individuals like him solidify their control, by convening everyone in one location, framing the narrative to their advantage, and compelling them to choose sides." As anticipated, that afternoon, a flyer appeared in our mailbox. Emergency HOA gathering. Saturday, approximately 4 p.m. Community dispute resolution was prominently displayed at the bottom. "It's bait," I remarked. "It's an opportunity," Sarah corrected. "He perceives this as the stage for my humiliation. Instead, it will be his." Saturday arrived, hot and bright, the kind of afternoon that made the asphalt shimmer with heat. By 3:50, folding chairs were arranged in a loose semicircle on the grassy strip directly in front of our residence. Nearly 30 neighbors had gathered, a turnout far exceeding any previous HOA meeting I had witnessed. Greg arrived exuding his characteristic aura of authority, clad in a crisp navy polo shirt, the same counterfeit badge clipped to his chest, and a pair of aviator sunglasses. Two of his so-called inspectors flanked him, clutching clipboards as if they were official legal documents. "Thank you all for attending," he began, his voice pitched to carry across the gathering. "We are assembled today because certain residents have demonstrably refused to adhere to established community standards. This is not a personal matter. It pertains to safeguarding the security and aesthetic integrity of Oakwood Heights." He gestured towards our fence as if it were Exhibit A in a criminal trial. 6 feet tall, wrought iron bars, it obstructs sightlines from the street. It creates blind spots. In my professional assessment, it constitutes a significant security hazard. A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled crowd. Greg moved closer to the center. "And that is not all. My independent investigation has uncovered that Mrs. Sarah Walker is engaged in activities that raise serious concerns regarding national security." It was at that precise moment that Sarah stepped forward. She was attired in a sleek black blazer over a simple blouse, her hair neatly pulled back. No visible badge, no firearm, merely a composed, steady presence that immediately commanded everyone's attention. "Greg," she stated, interrupting his monologue. He blinked, momentarily taken aback. "What is it?" "Kindly provide us with your police identification number." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Greg emitted a short, dismissive laugh. "That is sensitive information. I am not at liberty to disclose it publicly." Sarah's tone remained unwavering. "Every sworn law enforcement officer in this county possesses a badge number. This is a matter of public record, and its provision is standard procedure." Greg's jaw tightened. "As I previously stated, I am not obligated to comply." Sarah turned towards a folding table where she had placed her laptop and a portable speaker. With a few swift clicks, the HOA's projector illuminated the portable screen behind her, displaying the official county roster of active law enforcement personnel. She deliberately scrolled to the M section. "This," she announced, "represents the complete list of every officer currently serving within our county. As you can clearly observe, there is no Greg Morrison listed." The murmurs of the crowd intensified. She clicked again, bringing up a different document. "Here is a receipt for a counterfeit police badge purchased from an online costume supplier, shipped to 742 Elmwood Drive, Greg's residence 8 months ago." Greg's face flushed crimson. That's fabricated." Sarah did not raise her voice, but her subsequent words cut through the rising noise. "Is this also fabricated?" The screen transitioned to a still image captured by our garage camera. It depicted Greg at precisely 5:37 in the morning, leaning against our window, his phone in hand, taking photographs of her stage training inventory list. Gasps rippled through the audience. "And this," she continued, playing a brief audio clip, "Greg's voice, recorded by our front yard microphone 2 nights prior, will ensure they are removed before the scheduled delivery." Greg's carefully constructed composure began to crumble. He stepped forward, his voice escalating in volume. "She is distorting the facts. You people fail to comprehend." Sarah raised a hand. "What we comprehend is that you have been impersonating a police officer, trespassing on private property, and collaborating with known real estate scam artists to target military families within this neighborhood." The crowd erupted into a cacophony of overlapping questions. Greg's accompanying inspectors suddenly appeared as though they desperately wished to be anywhere else. Greg jabbed a finger towards Sarah, his voice a furious growl. "You believe you can make a fool out of me? You have absolutely no idea whom you are dealing with." Sarah's eyes locked onto his, her gaze unwavering. "No, Greg. You have absolutely no idea whom you are dealing with." The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to almost taste. I observed Greg's hands twitching, his weight shifting, as if he were on the verge of an impulsive, ill-advised action. Sarah must have perceived it as well, as she subtly adopted a more guarded stance, prepared for whatever might transpire next. I had no inkling at that moment that what followed would involve a firearm, a scream, and the swiftest apprehension I had ever witnessed. However, in that instant, with Greg cornered and exposed before the entire neighborhood, the foundations of his petty empire began to irrevocably crack. Greg's voice grew louder, his hands twitching in short, sharp movements. The assembled crowd was no longer leaning towards him. They were recoiling. "Don't listen to her," he barked, jabbing his finger in Sarah's direction. "She is a threat to this neighborhood, to all of you. I've examined her files. I know what she is capable of." Sarah remained perfectly still, her shoulders squared, her eyes fixed on him. "Greg, you need to cease speaking." He continued his tirade, his voice escalating in volume and acrimony. "Did you truly believe you were secure with her present? She has undergone extensive combat training, and when she decides to turn, she will—" The movement was swift, though not quite swift enough to deceive Sarah. Greg's hand descended to his belt, his fingers tightening around the hilt of his sidearm. The onlookers gasped in unison. A woman's shriek pierced the air. Folding chairs screeched across the concrete as individuals recoiled in haste. "Gun!" someone shouted. In that precise moment, everything seemed to decelerate. Greg wrenched his weapon free, aiming it with both hands directly at Sarah. His voice now trembled, not with apprehension, but with unbridled fury. "Silence, all of you. Attend to my words." Sarah remained immobile, neither retreating nor shifting her stance. Her hands stayed clearly visible, resting calmly at her sides. Her voice, low and steady, somehow possessed greater volume than his bellowing. "Greg, you have just committed the gravest error of your existence." I recognized that intonation. It wasn't defiance, it was a pronouncement of consequence. She advanced a single deliberate step. "You are brandishing a loaded firearm at an elected representative of law enforcement in the presence of 30 witnesses and under camera surveillance." She gestured subtly towards the numerous mobile devices held aloft. "Your neighbors are broadcasting this live." Greg's gaze flickered, taking in the recording instruments. "They don't grasp the reality of the situation." "They comprehend enough," she countered. "And your time has expired." The sequence of events unfolded with a speed that defied my perception. One instant, Greg held the weapon pointed at her torso. The next, Sarah was in motion, a whirlwind of calculated efficiency. She sidestepped, moving within his line of sight, her left hand striking his wrist while her right hand seized the barrel, forcing it upwards. The firearm discharged once, the report a sharp crack that rent the atmosphere like a thunderclap. The scent of cordite filled the air, and I felt the percussive force resonate through my chest. Before another cry could escape anyone, Sarah had wrested the firearm from his grasp, moved behind him, and expertly applied a joint lock that brought him to his knees. In under 3 seconds, Greg Mitchell, the self-proclaimed guardian of the neighborhood, lay prone on the lawn, Sarah's knee positioned between his shoulder blades, his wrists secured behind him with a pair of black zip ties she had produced from her blazer pocket, as if the entire maneuver had been prearranged. The assembled crowd stood transfixed, utterly silent, save for the ragged breaths of those who had stumbled into one another during the commotion. Sarah's voice rang out, clear and authoritative. "Greg Mitchell, you are hereby placed under arrest for impersonating a law enforcement officer, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy to commit fraud." A single clap broke the silence. It was followed by another, and then a wave of applause rippled through the gathering. Initially hesitant, it soon grew in intensity. The pervasive tension dissipated, replaced by a palpable sense of relief, admiration, and even a touch of awe. Greg struggled beneath her restraint, his face flushed crimson, spitting curses. "You believe this is concluded? You have no comprehension of the depths of this." Sarah offered no reply. She maintained her steady pressure, her eyes sweeping the periphery as if anticipating trouble from an unseen source. It was at this juncture that I observed 2 of Greg's associates had vanished, having slipped away amidst the pandemonium. She must have registered their absence as well, for she called out without averting her gaze. "Daniel, contact the sheriff's department. Inform them I have one individual in custody, but two remain at large and are likely armed." I had my cellular device in hand before she finished her statement. Within moments, official deputies arrived, their sirens announcing their approach before their vehicles came into view. They halted abruptly, doors swinging open, weapons drawn, until Sarah identified herself and surrendered the confiscated firearm. Detective Maria Santos, a woman of compact build with keen eyes, surveyed Greg, then Sarah. "He has been on our watch list. You have just provided us with the essential probable cause." Greg was roughly hoisted to his feet, his wrists still bound, and propelled towards the rear of a patrol car. He offered no further resistance, merely muttering resentfully under his breath, his gaze fixed on Sarah with an intensity that suggested he could inflict harm through sheer willpower. Before being fully loaded into the vehicle, he twisted his head to address her. "You were targeted, Walker, long before you relocated here, and when they dispatch another, it will not be me you contend with." Sarah's expression remained impassive, yet I detected a hardening in her eyes. The patrol cars departed, and the crowd began to disperse, murmuring with the residual energy that follows a significant event. Neighbors who had previously maintained distance now approached, extending their hands to Sarah in gratitude. She did not reciprocate with a smile. "This is not concluded," she informed them. "Not until we ascertain their identities." Standing beside her, I realized her words were directed not only at the neighbors but at me as well. The deputies had scarcely cleared the street when Sarah's phone vibrated. She stepped aside to answer, her voice modulated to a low register, allowing me to grasp only fragments. "In custody? Negative. Two still at large. Confirm vehicle descriptors." Upon her return, her countenance was set in that inscrutable mask I had come to associate with her operating several steps ahead of everyone else. "That was Captain Rodriguez. He is deploying a joint task force here tomorrow. Greg is not an isolated operative. He is integral to a larger enterprise that has eluded capture for months." I recalled Greg's parting words. "You were targeted long before you moved here." So that part of his declaration was truthful. She shook her head. "Not this time." That evening, Sarah meticulously arranged her findings across the dining room table. Property deeds, legal documents, corporate registrations. Half of these I'd encountered earlier in the week. The remainder were new. She indicated a flowchart she had meticulously drafted. "This is the modus operandi. Mitchell, Greg, identifies a prospective family, typically those associated with the military or law enforcement due to their inherent discipline, stability, and property ownership in areas designated by Hale. He then fabricates or exaggerates a case against them, leveraging his fabricated authority, penalties, threats, code violations. Ultimately, the mounting pressure compels them to divest their property." She tapped the subsequent segment. "That is where Hale intervenes. He acquires the residence through one of his shell corporations and resells it for a substantial profit. This process is then replicated in a different locale." I followed one of the arrows on her diagram. "And you surmise they have executed this scheme? How many times?" She met my gaze directly. "We possess confirmed evidence pertaining to at least 40 families across 6 distinct states, though the actual figure could be double that." I leaned back, attempting to fully grasp the magnitude of the situation. "Why target military families specifically?" "They tend to be discreet, accustomed to adhering to directives, less inclined to publicly air grievances, and more amenable to relocating quietly under duress. Furthermore, some possess security clearances. By displacing them from specific neighborhoods, they can influence the demographic composition surrounding vital installations." The implication sent a shiver down my spine. "You are suggesting this transcends mere financial gain?" "Indeed," she affirmed, her tone unwavering. "It is about exerting influence." By morning, the task force had arrived. Captain Rodriguez presented as a tall, broad-shouldered man with streaks of gray at his temples and an affable smile that did little to mask the gravity in his eyes. "Sarah," he greeted, clasping her hand with a familiarity that suggested shared trials. You have significantly improved my disposition this month. We have been pursuing Mitchell across state lines for 3 years. He then addressed me. And you? My gratitude for your meticulous record keeping. That footage of the mailbox delivery is invaluable. I glanced at Sarah. That was part of the bait, wasn't it? She offered the faintest of nods. The subsequent 48 hours were a whirlwind. Search warrants were executed at Greg's residence and the 2 adjacent properties linked to Hale's enterprises. I observed agents carefully extracting boxes of documents, hard drives, and even a duffel bag laden with counterfeit law enforcement paraphernalia, including badges, patches, and identification. One of the detectives presented Sarah with a tablet retrieved from Greg's office. It contained detailed notes on each target, encompassing their habits, financial standing, and even the educational institutions attended by their children. Sarah's jaw tightened. This is not mere intimidation. It is sophisticated intelligence gathering. It transpired that the 2 inspectors who had absconded from the HOA meeting were apprehended in an adjacent county. Both were former security contractors with minor criminal histories, sufficient to render them compliant, but not so extensive as to raise immediate suspicion upon their relocation. Confronted with the evidence, they readily confessed, implicating Hale as the architect of the operation. Hale himself was apprehended 2 days later in Nevada, disembarking from a private aircraft. By the close of the week, the full scope of the affair had been revealed. Local news crews established a presence on our street, and national media outlets began to refer to the incident as the HOA sting. Reporters clamored for sound bites, residents sought reassurance, and the sheriff's department prominently featured Sarah. She issued a single concise statement. No individual, regardless of their authority or insignia, possesses the prerogative to intimidate a community for personal enrichment. If you perceive something amiss, speak out. That is the most effective means of safeguarding a neighborhood. Her declaration was devoid of theatrics but resonated deeply. That evening, with the house finally settled into quietude, I inquired, "So, is it concluded?" She poured 2 glasses of water, sliding one across the table towards me. "The operation? Yes. The investigation will extend for months, but Mitchell and Hale will remain incarcerated for a considerable duration." "And the other matter?" I pressed. She looked up. "What other matter?" "The aspect concerning Greg's assertion that we were targeted long before our arrival here." She paused before responding, her voice softer. "That is what troubles my sleep. If this were solely about the fence, he would never have exerted such pressure. Someone specifically desired our departure." I contemplated asking who she suspected, but her expression suggested she lacked a definitive answer, or perhaps possessed one she was unwilling to articulate. 6 weeks after Greg Mitchell was escorted away in handcuffs, Oakwood Heights felt transformed. The pervasive tension that had permeated the atmosphere for months had receded. Neighbors resumed greeting each other with waves, paused for conversations at their mailboxes, and allowed their children to play outdoors without the anxiety of furtive glances down the street. The HOA board, now demonstrably functional, convened in the community center rather than on private lawns. They implemented a system of rotating leadership, maintained transparent financial records, and established one unassailable regulation. No individual could hold a position with security in its title unless they possessed a legitimate law enforcement background and verifiable credentials. This was not merely a regulation. It was a scar transmuted into protective armor. Sarah declined leadership roles despite numerous nominations. True leadership lies in empowering individuals, not wielding authority over them, she conveyed to the assembly at the inaugural Reformed HOA meeting. Her pronouncement elicited a standing ovation and was subsequently emblazoned on flyers promoting our inaugural Unity Day barbecue. She did, however, consent to conduct a monthly community safety seminar. The inaugural session attracted 20 attendees, the second 40. By the third month, the venue had to be relocated to the high school gymnasium. The curriculum extended beyond self-defense to encompass situational assessment, identifying fraudulent displays of authority, and documenting suspicious activities in a manner that would facilitate effective law enforcement intervention. She emphatically advised, "Do not be paranoid, but do not be passive." The children idolized her. At Unity Day, they gravitated towards her, perceiving her as a superhero clad in denim and a baseball cap. One young boy inquired if she could demonstrate the maneuver that compels an adversary's arm into a backward bend. She chuckled, promising a safer adaptation, and then had him practice the emergency notification technique she had imparted to every child. Shout loudly, identify the threat, describe it. Observing her interact with the crowd, I came to a realization. Greg had selected the wrong adversary, but the right neighbor. She had not merely dismantled his scheme, she had fortified the entire community. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky beyond our still-standing 6-foot fence, I posed the question, "Do you ever regret revealing your true capabilities?" She took a slow sip of her tea, her gaze fixed on the street. "There are occasions when discretion is paramount," she stated. "However, there are also times when candor is the most valuable offering one can provide." Her eyes drifted towards the playground, where a bronze plaque now adorned the new slide, funded by assets recovered from Greg's property transactions, honoring those who champion truth and safeguard our shared home. Life began to resume its normal rhythm, yet subtle reminders persisted that the larger conflict had not entirely concluded. Consider, for instance, the postcard that arrived with no return address. The front bore an image of a tranquil suburban street in Virginia. The reverse side contained a solitary sentence. "You neutralized one of them. There are more." Sarah did not share this communication with the neighbors. She simply filed it within a folder in her locked desk drawer, then contacted Rodriguez via a secure line. Or the night I awoke to find her seated at the kitchen table, illuminated solely by the luminescence of her laptop, perusing a spreadsheet of names and addresses I did not recognize. When I inquired, she offered a faint smile and replied, "Simply maintaining my awareness." For the residents of our block, the narrative concluded happily. We had regained our peace. The fence that had ignited the conflict was now merely a feature of the landscape, no longer a point of contention. The HOA functioned in our favor, not against us, and neighbors who had once been strangers were now friends who brought over baked goods, exchanged holiday decorations, and cared for each other's pets. It was almost ordinary. Almost. One Saturday morning in early autumn, as I was planting bulbs along the walkway, a white van proceeded slowly past. This was not unusual. Delivery vans were a common sight. However, I noted the driver's gaze linger on our residents a fraction too long. Sarah, standing in the doorway, registered the same observation. She offered no greeting, no frown marred her expression. She simply watched until the van rounded the corner, then retreated inside and secured the door. "Anything of note?" I inquired upon entering. "Probably nothing," she replied. After a brief pause, she added, "But I will remain vigilant." That was the essence of residing with Sarah. Even when the street was tranquil, she understood that silence could precede the next surge of turbulence. The subsequent HOA meeting was scheduled in 2 days. She was now a member of the Oversight Committee, and I knew she would attend. She would occupy a seat at the rear, observing, analyzing, ensuring that no one would ever again have the opportunity to don a counterfeit badge in Oakwood Heights, because Sarah Walker, the woman Greg Mitchell had underestimated, was not merely my spouse. She was, in essence, the guardian of this jurisdiction, sworn to its protection. And I had learned a crucial lesson over these preceding months. When she resolved to defend her people, she did not merely achieve victory. She fundamentally altered the very nature of the engagement. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was for this reason that the prevailing quietude felt less like a conclusion and more like the inception of something of greater significance.